Olivia Daniels stood alone at the edge of the Fort McAllister training grounds. Every other recruit performed drills with practiced precision while instructors barked orders across the dusty field. But Olivia simply observed, her slender frame nearly swallowed by a standard-issue uniform that hung loose on her shoulders. The civilian consultant badge on her chest might as well have been a target, drawing suspicious glances and whispered comments from everyone who passed. None of them knew what lay beneath her unassuming exterior, a secret that would transform the entire command structure of this elite military installation in less than 24 hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 3 weeks now, Olivia had maintained her cover perfectly. While others charged through obstacle courses, she took detailed notes. While they fired weapons at the range, she quietly analyzed their techniques. While they shouted commands during tactical exercises, she remained silent, watchful. The other candidates had labeled her the ghost recruit, someone who didn't belong but somehow couldn't be removed. The Joint Strategic Operations Program was the military's most exclusive training initiative, designed to bridge elite civilian expertise with military precision. Every person admitted had earned their place through distinguished service records, advanced specialized degrees, or extraordinary field achievements. Everyone except Olivia, who appeared one morning with paperwork signed by authorities none of the instructors recognized, and instructions to allow her complete access while requiring minimal participation. Her movements were efficient and deliberate, never drawing attention, yet never faltering. During briefings, when instructors explained mission parameters that made other recruits sweat with anxiety, her expression remained neutral, almost detached, as though evaluating a chess match rather than life-or-death scenarios. When asked direct questions, she gave precise, minimal answers that revealed nothing about her background or qualifications. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Olivia checked her equipment outside the supply building. She could hear familiar voices approaching from behind, a group of 3 female recruits led by Captain Morgan Fairfield. Tall with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a confidence born from graduating top of her class at West Point, Fairfield hadn't bothered hiding her disdain for Olivia since day one. "Seriously, what's she even doing here?" Fairfield's voice carried intentionally across the yard. "Look at her, 5 foot nothing, barely 100 pounds soaking wet. She couldn't carry standard field gear across this compound, let alone in actual combat." The women with her, Sergeant Diana Pierce and Lieutenant Vanessa Coleman, laughed appreciatively, emboldened by Fairfield's open mockery. "I heard she's some congressman's niece," Pierce added, her voice dripping with contempt. "Probably thinks this looks good on her resume for a government desk job." Coleman leaned in, her voice theatrical but deliberately loud. "My brother works at Pentagon Recruitment. Says there's no record of her in any military database. No service history, no special qualifications. Nothing." Olivia continued organizing her gear methodically, giving no indication she heard their comments. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment with a precision that would have impressed anyone actually paying attention to her technique rather than her size. A group of male recruits had gathered nearby, drawn by the commotion. Among them was Major Thomas Reynolds, a former Army Ranger with combat decorations and a physique built through years of Special Forces training. The intricate military tattoos covering his forearms marked him as someone who had earned his place through blood and sacrifice. "This isn't summer camp," Reynolds said, crossing his muscular arms as he assessed Olivia with open skepticism. "We're training for operations where people's lives depend on every team member pulling their weight. What happens when she can't carry her share of equipment, or drag a wounded soldier to safety?" Another recruit, First Lieutenant Jacob Wilson, fresh from 3 tours in combat zones, shook his head in disgust. "This program is supposed to be elite, the best of the best, and they let in someone who looks like she belongs in a university library." Olivia finished her equipment check and turned toward the training field, walking past the group with measured steps. She could feel their stares following her, judging, dismissing, underestimating. But she'd felt those looks before, throughout her entire career. What none of them knew, what no one at this facility was cleared to know, was that Olivia had spent the last 5 years working under Colonel Marcus Westfield in Operation Phantom Shield, a classified program so secret that fewer than 12 people in the entire military hierarchy knew its full parameters. Only 7 operatives had been selected for the final mission. Only 1 had returned. Olivia still woke up some nights hearing the voices of the 6 who never made it home. She carried their memory with her always, encoded in the intricate tattoo hidden beneath her uniform, where no one could see it unless she chose to reveal it. The symbol of the Phantom Shield Unit, an ancient Spartan shield overlaid with modern tactical markings, represented a level of classified operations that most military personnel would never know existed. As she walked toward the training field, Olivia sensed the tension building behind her. Today felt different from the previous weeks of quiet observation. The air practically crackled with anticipation. Today, someone would push too far, and the careful distance she'd maintained would collapse. But she was ready. She'd been preparing for this moment since she arrived. The morning heat intensified as recruits assembled for the day's evaluation exercises. Word had spread that today's performance would determine final selections for the advanced training phase. Only the top performers would continue. The rest would be sent back to their original units with a polite dismissal letter. The pressure had everyone on edge, amplifying tensions and rivalries that had been simmering for weeks. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Olivia took her assigned position at the far end of the formation, standing at perfect attention despite the sweat beginning to trickle down her back. Around her, other recruits fidgeted nervously or exchanged last-minute advice. She remained still, her breathing steady, her mind already mapping the most likely scenarios for the day's challenges. Major Benjamin Lawson strode onto the field with the arrogant confidence of someone who had never failed at anything important. At 32, he was young for his rank, with a spotless uniform, immaculate appearance, and a reputation for brutal honesty in his assessments. He'd been watching Olivia since she arrived, his suspicion growing with each passing day. To him, she represented everything wrong with modern military integration: standards lowered, exceptions made, tradition compromised. "Attention!" Lawson shouted, his voice carrying across the field with practiced authority. The formation snapped to perfect stillness, including Olivia, who moved with a fluid precision that would have been remarkable to anyone watching closely. But Lawson wasn't looking for competence or skill in her movements. He was looking for weakness, for proof that she didn't belong. His eyes swept across the assembled recruits before settling exactly where everyone expected them to. "Daniels!" he barked. "Front and center!" Olivia stepped forward without hesitation, moving with efficient grace that seemed almost incongruous with her small frame. She took position in front of Lawson, standing at attention with her eyes focused on a point just beyond his shoulder. The entire field had fallen silent, tension thickening the air. Lawson began circling her slowly, his boots crunching on the packed dirt. "Tell me something, Daniels," he said, his voice carrying that particular inflection officers use when they've decided to make an example of someone. "What exactly do you think gives you the right to be here?" Olivia remained silent, her expression neutral despite the public challenge. She had faced interrogations before, situations where revealing too much or too little could mean death. This was just another test, another moment to measure her response carefully. "Look around you," Lawson continued, gesturing expansively at the formation. "Every person standing on this field has earned their place. Years of service, combat experience, specialized training, proven capabilities." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, an inappropriate luxury in a training environment. "But you? You just showed up with papers no one can verify, and suddenly you're entitled to train alongside real soldiers?" The crowd was growing larger. Other instructors had noticed the confrontation and were moving closer, drawn by the unusual public dressing down of a recruit. Some looked uncomfortable with the spectacle, but none intervened. Military hierarchy was clear. You didn't question a superior officer's methods unless they clearly violated regulations. Olivia sensed the eyes on her, the shifting of bodies as people positioned themselves for a better view. Camera phones were being discreetly removed from pockets, ready to capture whatever happened next. This moment would be shared across military networks within hours, becoming the day's entertainment for people who had no idea what real combat looked like. "This uniform," Lawson said, his voice rising as he tugged at the sleeve of her jacket, "represents a legacy of courage and sacrifice. It's worn by people willing to die for their country without hesitation." He paused, making sure everyone could hear his next words. "And someone like you thinks you have the right to put it on? Based on what qualifications exactly?" Still, Olivia said nothing. Her silence seemed to infuriate Lawson further. He was accustomed to fear, to nervous explanations, to visible discomfort. But Olivia stood before him as if his words were merely background noise, something to be observed rather than internalized. That's when Lawson made his critical error. "You know what?" he said, stepping back so everyone could see them clearly. "I don't believe you've earned the right to wear that uniform at all." His voice dropped to a dangerous register. "So I want you to take it off. Right now, right here." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Even the instructors looked shocked. This went beyond acceptable discipline, beyond traditional military hazing. This was public humiliation designed to break someone completely. Olivia could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could sense the anticipation building around her. Some recruits looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding direct eye contact with the scene unfolding before them. Others watched with barely concealed excitement, eager to see the quiet outsider finally broken. But Olivia didn't protest. She didn't look around for someone to intervene. She didn't even change her expression. Instead, she reached for the zipper of her training jacket with the same steady hand she'd used to disarm explosive devices under enemy fire. The metal teeth separated with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. She shrugged the jacket from her shoulders and let it fall to the ground at her feet. Underneath, she wore a standard-issue tan t-shirt that revealed arms more muscled than her loose uniform had suggested. Her skin bore small, nearly invisible scars that told stories of past missions, evidence of a history that none of the watching recruits could begin to comprehend. As Olivia adjusted her stance in the morning heat, turning slightly to maintain her balance, something became visible on her upper back through the thin fabric of her shirt. Not just any marking, a specific insignia that made several of the senior instructors inhale sharply. The Phantom Shield emblem, a stylized Spartan shield overlaid with specialized tactical markings and surrounded by 7 stars in a particular configuration, was partially visible through her shirt. It wasn't a tattoo anyone could walk into a shop and request. It wasn't something that could be researched online or replicated accurately. It was a mark reserved exclusively for operatives who had completed missions so classified that most military generals weren't briefed on their existence. Lawson had stopped speaking. His mouth remained open, words forgotten as recognition dawned in his eyes. Around the field, conversations died mid-sentence. People who had been eagerly awaiting Olivia's humiliation suddenly found themselves taking involuntary steps backward, creating distance between themselves and something they didn't understand. That's when the sound of purposeful footsteps approached from the administration building, heavy, measured steps carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. General Richard Hargrove had been watching the scene unfold from his office window. What had started as routine observation of training exercises had quickly become something requiring his immediate intervention when he saw Lawson publicly humiliating a recruit. But when he noticed the partially visible Phantom Shield emblem on Olivia's back, Hargrove felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine shock followed by the cold certainty that Major Lawson had just made a catastrophic career error. Hargrove was one of the few people with clearance high enough to recognize that insignia. 28 years of military service, including oversight of special operations planning, had exposed him to classified programs that most officers would never know existed. He'd been briefed on Operation Phantom Shield 3 years ago after it was completed, and understood exactly what that emblem represented. Hargrove's voice, when he finally spoke, carried across the training field with the quiet authority that made everyone instantly attentive. "Major Lawson," he said, each word precisely measured, "would you care to explain why you're issuing orders to a Phantom Shield operative?" The silence that followed Hargrove's question was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that happens when reality shifts so dramatically that everyone needs a moment to process the new information. Lawson turned toward the general, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, dawning horror. Phantom Shield wasn't just a classified operation. It was legendary among the highest levels of military command, a mission so secret that its official files were accessible only to those with Alpha Omega clearance. The operatives selected for Phantom Shield were given authority that superseded normal military chain of command, answering directly to the Joint Chiefs. "I asked you a question, Major," Hargrove continued, his voice deadly calm. "Phantom Shield operatives operate under Presidential Directive 1917. They are outside standard military hierarchy." He paused, letting the implications settle across the field. "So I'm asking you again. Who authorized you to issue orders to Operative Daniels?" Lawson's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Around the training ground, people were starting to put the pieces together. The senior instructors, those who had been in service long enough to hear whispers about black operations, were looking at Olivia with new understanding. They remembered classified briefings where Phantom Shield had been mentioned in hushed tones, details compartmentalized to the point that no single person knew the complete operation. What they hadn't known, what no one had suspected, was that one of the operatives had been placed in their training program, disguised as an unremarkable civilian consultant. Olivia hadn't moved since removing her jacket. She stood at attention, her posture perfect, her expression revealing nothing. The Phantom Shield emblem remained visible through her shirt, a silent testimony to her true identity and authority. But inside, memories were surfacing. The night 3 years ago, when she'd navigated hostile territory for 14 hours, with a broken ankle to reach the extraction point. The weight of Colonel Westfield's body, as she'd carried him the final mile, even though he was already gone. The moment she realized she was the only survivor. The faces of her team members appeared in her mind, clear as photographs. Gabriel, Sophia, Marcus, Elena, Michael, and James. 6 stars on her tattoo, 1 for each of them. The 7th star, slightly offset from the others, represented her, the one who lived. That's when someone in the crowd made a fatal miscalculation. Captain Morgan Fairfield, the blonde officer who had been mocking Olivia that morning, stepped forward with her chin raised defiantly. "With all due respect, General," Fairfield said, her tone suggesting very little actual respect, "anyone can get a tattoo. How do we know she's actually who you think she is? This could be an elaborate ploy to infiltrate our program." Hargrove's head turned toward Fairfield with mechanical precision, his expression suggesting that her interruption was testing the limits of his considerable self-control. But before he could respond, Fairfield compounded her error by approaching Olivia directly. "I want to see actual credentials," she said, reaching for the ID badge hanging around Olivia's neck. "Let's verify who you really are before." Olivia moved. Most of the observers missed what actually happened. One moment, Fairfield was reaching for Olivia's ID. The next, she was face down on the ground with her arm twisted behind her back at an angle that made several onlookers wince involuntarily. Olivia had executed a perfect counter, catching Fairfield's wrist, redirecting her momentum, and using the captain's own forward motion to take her to the ground. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds and was executed with such fluid precision that it appeared almost choreographed. Fairfield gasped as her cheek hit the dirt. Olivia released her immediately and stepped back, her movements calm and controlled as she straightened her posture. Fairfield struggled to her feet, clutching her shoulder and staring at Olivia with a combination of shock and humiliation. 2 medical personnel began moving toward them from the sidelines. Hargrove watched this display with professional assessment. What Olivia had demonstrated went beyond standard combat training. The speed, precision, and control spoke of thousands of hours of specialized instruction and real-world application. She had neutralized the threat without causing serious injury, showing restraint that came only from absolute mastery. "Anyone else have questions about Operative Daniels' credentials?" Hargrove asked, his tone making it clear that further challenges would be unwise. The field had gone completely silent. Recruits who had dismissed Olivia as weak or out of place were now seeing her through new eyes. The woman they had judged as inadequate had just neutralized a trained officer without apparent effort. But Lieutenant Pierce, one of Fairfield's friends who had participated in the morning's mockery, wasn't ready to accept the new reality. She stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment and lingering defiance. "Fine," she said, her voice strained but determined. "So she knows some combat moves. So she has a fancy tattoo. That doesn't change the fact that she's been getting special treatment for 3 weeks while the rest of us work our asses off." Pierce's voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by the desperate need to salvage some dignity from the situation. She's probably just some overhyped specialist who got lucky on one classified mission. Olivia's eyes shifted to Pierce, the first time all morning she had directly acknowledged any of her critics. It was a subtle movement, just her gaze tracking from its neutral position to focus on the lieutenant's face. But something in that look made Pierce take an involuntary step backward. Without breaking eye contact, Olivia reached into the pocket of her pants and removed a folded piece of paper. Not her official credentials, as everyone expected, but something else entirely. A tactical operations analysis with markings that identified it as classified material. She walked to a nearby table where training materials were laid out and carefully unfolded the document. The paper was stamped Top Secret in bold red letters across the top, with clearance requirements that made several instructors lean forward with renewed interest. This combat scenario, Olivia said, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began, has been used as the cornerstone of this program's tactical training for the past 14 months. Her voice was quiet but carried a natural authority that commanded attention. Despite its softness, everyone on the field could hear her clearly. Years of giving mission briefings in life-or-death situations had taught her how to make people listen without raising her volume. According to the standard solution protocols, she continued, picking up a marker from the table, the recommended approach involves a 2-team infiltration with aerial support designated at the 8-minute mark. She began making precise annotations on the tactical map, her marks creating an entirely new approach to the scenario. The problem, she said, her marker moving across the terrain features with absolute confidence, is that the standard solution is fatally flawed. The approach angle leaves the primary team exposed to counter-surveillance during the critical phase of insertion. She looked up from the map and made eye contact with Pierce. I know, because I ran this exact operation in real conditions. The scenario you've been training with is based on Operation Buckler, but it's been sanitized and simplified to the point of being dangerous. The silence stretched as Hargrove moved closer to examine Olivia's modifications. What she had drawn wasn't just a minor correction to the existing plan. It was a complete reconceptualization of the tactical problem, incorporating variables and contingencies that the original planners had overlooked entirely. This wasn't theoretical criticism from an academic perspective. This was battlefield intelligence that could only come from direct, first-hand experience, the kind of knowledge that meant the difference between mission success and body bags. Hargrove studied the map for a long moment, his expression growing increasingly serious with each second. What Olivia had drawn represented a level of tactical insight that went beyond training or simulation. This was the hard-won wisdom of someone who had faced these exact circumstances under fire and lived to report the flaws in the original planning. He pulled out his secure phone and spoke into it quietly, using code phrases that most of the observers didn't recognize. Within minutes, officers in formal uniforms were approaching from the administration building, carrying secured tablets and wearing expressions that suggested this situation had escalated far beyond a simple training dispute. One of them handed Hargrove a tablet, displaying information that only he could see. The general reviewed it, nodded gravely, and returned his attention to the assembled personnel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I have just received direct confirmation from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Effective immediately, Olivia Daniels is appointed as Special Advisor for Tactical Operations at this facility, with full authority over training protocols and operational planning." The announcement hit the training field like a thunderclap. Special Advisor for Tactical Operations wasn't just another title. It represented a position of extraordinary authority that placed Olivia above everyone who had been mocking her minutes earlier. She would now be evaluating their performance, determining their fitness for continued service, and making decisions that would shape their military careers for years to come. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present. The woman they had dismissed as weak and unqualified now held their professional futures in her hands. The power dynamic had completely reversed in the span of 15 minutes. Olivia accepted the appointment with the same calm professionalism she'd shown throughout the confrontation. She didn't smile triumphantly. She didn't gloat. She didn't even appear particularly surprised. She simply nodded to General Hargrove and said, "Thank you, sir. I'll implement immediate changes to improve operational readiness and safety." But her first priority was already clear. She turned to face the assembled trainees, her gaze moving methodically across their faces as if cataloging their reactions. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that made everyone straighten their posture involuntarily. "The tactical scenarios you've been practicing are based on incomplete intelligence," she stated. "Beginning tomorrow, we'll implement revised protocols based on actual field experience rather than theoretical models." She picked up her jacket from the ground and put it back on with deliberate movements. "The current training approach has an unacceptable casualty projection rate. Those of you who advance to the next phase will learn methods that have been tested under actual combat conditions, techniques that determine whether people live or die when the mission goes wrong." Major Lawson, who had been standing frozen in shock since Hargrove's arrival, finally found his voice. "Ma'am, I apologize. If I had known your position—" "You didn't know because you chose not to inquire," Olivia interrupted, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "You made assumptions based on appearance, and in a combat situation, those assumptions would have compromised the mission. That kind of error costs lives." She addressed the entire group. "Military effectiveness depends on recognizing capability regardless of its packaging. If you can't identify skill when it's standing directly in front of you, you're not prepared for the complexity of modern warfare." The weight of her words settled over the field like a physical presence. These weren't abstract observations. They were professional assessments that would determine careers. Every person present understood that their behavior toward Olivia over the past 3 weeks had been noted and would factor into her evaluation of their judgment and character. Hargrove stepped forward. "Operative Daniels will conduct individual assessments over the next 5 days. Her recommendations will determine advancement to the next training phase." He surveyed the trainees with a hard expression. "I suggest you demonstrate the kind of professional judgment that should have been evident from day one." As the crowd dispersed following Hargrove's dismissal, Olivia could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. Recruits who had openly mocked her now faced the prospect of being evaluated by the very person they had underestimated. Their futures in the program, and potentially their entire careers, now depended on her assessment. The real consequences began unfolding within hours. By mid-afternoon, as word of the morning's events spread throughout the facility, the first casualties of the new reality became apparent. Major Benjamin Lawson found himself facing a formal inquiry into his conduct, with witnesses lining up to testify about his public humiliation of a superior officer. Military regulations were explicit about respect for the chain of command, and Lawson had unknowingly ordered a presidential-level operative to remove her uniform in front of hundreds of observers. The inquiry board convened by evening, and their deliberations were brief. Lawson's actions violated multiple sections of the military code of conduct, and his failure to properly assess a situation before acting raised serious questions about his judgment and fitness for command. By nightfall, his once promising career was effectively over. Captain Morgan Fairfield discovered that her attempted confrontation with Olivia had been recorded on multiple phones and was already circulating through military social networks. The video showing an officer physically challenging a Phantom Shield operative reached her commanding officers within hours. Her sponsorship for the elite program was immediately revoked, and transfer orders to a remote Arctic monitoring station were processed with unusual speed. The assignment was classified as permanent, with no possibility of reassignment for at least 36 months. Lieutenant Pierce and the other officers who had participated in the morning's harassment found themselves under investigation for conduct unbecoming. Their social media histories were examined, their training records scrutinized, their performance evaluations downgraded. The military had clear policies against bullying and harassment, but when that behavior was directed at a decorated operative whose service record was classified at the highest levels, the consequences became career-defining. Olivia observed these developments with professional detachment. She took no satisfaction in seeing careers derailed, but she recognized that military discipline served a critical purpose. In actual combat situations, the kind of snap judgments and biases displayed that morning could result in mission failure and unnecessary casualties. Better to identify and address those weaknesses during training than discover them when lives were at stake. That evening, Olivia was summoned to the Secure Communications Center where a video conference was waiting. The faces on the screen represented the highest echelons of military leadership, generals and admirals whose decisions shaped national defense strategy at the global level. "Operative Daniels," the lead general began, "your handling of today's situation has been noted with interest. The tactical analysis you provided has already been forwarded to training facilities across all service branches. He consulted notes off-screen. We're implementing your recommendations immediately. The scenario revisions you suggested will become standard protocol within 14 days. Olivia nodded acknowledgement. The current methods would have resulted in preventable casualties, sir. Field experience should always take precedence over theoretical models. Agreed, the general replied. Which brings us to our next point. We're offering you a permanent position as Director of Advanced Tactical Training Development. You would be responsible for reviewing and updating combat protocols across all special operations units. It was the kind of position that could reshape military doctrine for generations. The opportunity to ensure that future operatives would benefit from hard-won knowledge and lessons paid for in blood and sacrifice. Olivia considered the offer carefully, weighing its implications against her original mission parameters. After 3 years of carrying the weight of being the sole survivor, the chance to prevent others from facing the same losses was powerful. The memory of her 6 teammates, their faces still clear in her mind, made the decision inevitable. I accept, she said finally. But I require complete authority to implement changes without administrative interference. Too many good people have died because someone with theoretical knowledge overruled those with practical experience. The general nodded gravely. Understood. You'll have full autonomy within your operational sphere. The official appointment will be processed immediately. As the call ended, Olivia realized that the morning's humiliation had led to something she hadn't anticipated. The opportunity to honor her fallen teammates by ensuring that their sacrifice led to meaningful change in how military personnel were trained and prepared for real-world operations. Within a week, Fort McAllister had been transformed. Olivia's appointment as Director of Advanced Tactical Training brought immediate and comprehensive changes that affected every aspect of the program. Her first action was replacing the flawed Operation Buckler scenario with a training exercise based on actual combat conditions, incorporating the kind of real-world variables that theoretical planners often overlooked. Trainees who had expected to follow familiar routines found themselves facing challenges that tested not just their physical abilities, but their capacity to think under pressure, adapt when plans collapsed, and make life-or-death decisions with incomplete information. The failure rate increased dramatically, but the quality of those who succeeded improved even more significantly. Olivia instituted a new evaluation system that prioritized practical problem-solving over theoretical knowledge. Students were assessed on their ability to adapt to changing conditions, not their ability to recite protocols. The quiet observers, the analytical thinkers, the people who might have been overlooked under the previous system began to excel. Perhaps the most profound change was in the culture of the facility itself. The casual dismissal of individuals based on appearance or background was replaced by a professional environment where competence was recognized regardless of its packaging. Olivia made it clear that personal biases and superficial judgments weren't just unprofessional, they were dangerous liabilities in combat situations. In a briefing that became required viewing for all incoming instructors, she demonstrated how unconscious bias could lead to tactical failures with deadly consequences. The enemy doesn't care about your preconceptions, she told a group of senior officers. They don't care if you think someone looks strong or weak, conventional or unconventional. They care about exploiting your vulnerabilities. And if you can't recognize capability when it's standing right in front of you, you're creating a vulnerability that will be exploited. Her message was unambiguous. Competence would be recognized and rewarded, while prejudice would be identified and eliminated as a threat to operational security. The changes weren't universally embraced. Some traditionalists resented being told their methods were outdated or dangerous. A few trainees who had expected to advance based on connections or physical presence found themselves failing evaluations they had assumed would be formalities. But the results spoke for themselves. Within 4 months, graduates from Olivia's revised program were showing measurably improved performance in field exercises. Units trained under her protocols were completing missions with fewer casualties and higher success rates. The Joint Chiefs took notice. Other facilities began requesting copies of her curriculum. Military allies started sending observers to study her methods. The woman who had been dismissed as insignificant had become one of the most influential figures in modern military training development. But for Olivia, the most meaningful change was deeply personal. The nightmares that had haunted her since Operation Phantom Shield, vivid dreams where she repeatedly failed to save her teammates, began to occur less frequently. Their sacrifice was being transformed into something that would save countless other lives. She had found a way to honor their memory while building something meaningful from the ashes of that failed mission. The quiet observer had become the architect of a new approach to military training, one that recognized that true strength often came in unexpected packages, and that real capability frequently hid beneath an unassuming exterior. 18 months after that pivotal morning at Fort McAllister, Olivia Daniels stood before a joint military committee, presenting her annual report on training effectiveness. The statistics were compelling. Casualty rates in special operations had decreased by 27%. Mission success rates had increased by 32%. And a new generation of military leaders was emerging who understood that competence could not be judged by superficial characteristics. But the numbers only captured part of the transformation. The real change had been cultural, a fundamental shift in how military personnel were evaluated and developed. Training programs across all service branches had adopted Olivia's core principle: never underestimate someone based on appearance or background. The Phantom Shield emblem had become a powerful symbol throughout military circles, a reminder that true capability often remained hidden until the moment it was needed most. Military tattoo artists reported receiving numerous requests for similar designs, though few who wore them had earned the right to display the original. Olivia's office at the Pentagon was functional and unadorned, with minimal personal touches. But one wall held a simple framed photograph, 7 people in combat gear taken the night before the Phantom Shield mission launched. 6 faces smiled at the camera, confident in their abilities and their mission. Olivia stood in the center, her expression serious and focused. It was the last image of the complete team. She kept it there not as a reminder of loss, but as a testament to the importance of her current work. Every protocol she revised, every training manual she updated, every instructor she mentored, carried the potential to prevent another team from being lost, another mission from failing, another family from receiving the notification that shattered lives. The knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. A young lieutenant entered, carrying a folder marked with the highest security classifications. "Ma'am, we've received a request from Central Command. They want your assessment of the training protocols for a new classified operation." Olivia accepted the folder, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. "What's the timeline?" "They need your recommendations within 48 hours, ma'am. The operation is scheduled to begin next month." As the lieutenant departed, Olivia opened the folder and began reviewing the contents. The mission parameters were complex, the risks substantial, the potential for casualties significant if the team wasn't properly prepared. But she had resources now that didn't exist 3 years ago, training methods that had been tested and proven, protocols that incorporated the hard-won lessons of Operation Phantom Shield. She picked up her pen and began making annotations, each mark potentially saving lives she would never meet, preventing losses that families would never have to endure. The quiet woman who had been publicly humiliated for not looking like a real soldier had become the architect of a fundamental shift in military doctrine. The observer who had been dismissed as weak had transformed how the world's most powerful military identified and developed strength. In doing so, she had ensured that the sacrifice of her teammates would continue to protect others long after their names had been classified beyond public recognition. The tattoo on her back remained hidden beneath her uniform most days, but its meaning had spread throughout the military establishment. True strength didn't announce itself with bravado or physical intimidation. It waited, observed, and acted with precision when circumstances demanded. Olivia Daniels had learned that lesson through blood and sacrifice, and now the military was learning it too. As she worked through the night, revising the operation plans to maximize both effectiveness and safety, Olivia felt the presence of her fallen teammates guiding her decisions. Gabriel would have questioned the extraction timing. Sophia would have spotted the surveillance vulnerability. Marcus would have suggested an alternative approach to the primary objective. Their voices remained with her, not as ghosts but as valued counsel, their expertise living on through her work. By morning, she had completely restructured the operation, eliminating unnecessary risks while improving the probability of mission success. The analysts who reviewed her recommendations would never know that 6 invisible collaborators had contributed to the plan. that the wisdom of an entire Phantom Shield team had been distilled into these revisions. In the end, the greatest victories were often achieved not by those who looked the part, but by those who had earned the right to play it, whether anyone recognized them or not. The legend of Phantom Shield lived on, carried forward by the quiet woman who understood that appearances could be fatally deceiving, and that true strength was often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to change everything. 3 months after revising the classified operation, Olivia received confirmation that the mission had been completed successfully. 0 casualties, all objectives achieved. Though the details would remain classified for decades, she knew that her revisions had prevented the same mistakes that had cost her team their lives 3 years earlier. Small victories like this sustained her through the endless meetings, bureaucratic resistance, and institutional inertia that threatened to undermine her reforms. On a crisp autumn morning, Olivia stood in the observation booth overlooking the advanced training facility she had designed. Below, 3 teams navigated a complex scenario that simulated an urban extraction under hostile conditions. The layout incorporated lessons from 12 different failed operations, missions where preventable errors had resulted in casualties. Every obstacle, every challenge, every unexpected complication represented a moment where someone had died because of inadequate preparation. "Impressive," said a voice behind her. "Your candidates are performing at levels we haven't seen before." Admiral William Sullivan, newly appointed head of Joint Special Operations Command, had been observing silently from the back of the booth. At 62, with silver hair and a face weathered by decades of service, Sullivan represented the old guard of military leadership, career officers who had risen through traditional channels and viewed innovation with cautious skepticism. "Thank you, sir," Olivia replied, her attention still focused on the teams below. She noted how the 3rd unit had adapted to an unexpected scenario change, restructuring their approach without losing operational cohesion. "They're learning to think rather than simply follow protocols." Sullivan moved to stand beside her at the observation window. "I've reviewed your quarterly reports. Casualty reductions across all operational theaters. Mission success rates up significantly. Retention of qualified personnel improved by 23%. He paused, studying her profile. "The Joint Chiefs are impressed." Olivia nodded acknowledgement but remained focused on the exercise below. Team 2 had encountered a situation where traditional doctrine would suggest a direct approach. Instead, their leader was implementing an unconventional solution that minimized exposure while maintaining mission parameters. Exactly the kind of adaptive thinking she had been working to develop. "But not everyone is happy with your methods," Sullivan continued. "There's resistance from several command structures. Complaints that you're dismantling established doctrine without proper authorization." Now Olivia turned to face him directly. "With respect, Admiral, established doctrine was getting people killed. The authorization I need comes from operational results, not committee approvals." Sullivan's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he had expected this response. "I agree. Which is why I'm here." He handed her a sealed folder with presidential-level security markings. "The Secretary of Defense has a situation that requires your specific expertise." Olivia accepted the folder but didn't immediately open it. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that could reshape our entire approach to asymmetric warfare if handled correctly. Or cost hundreds of lives if handled according to quote established doctrine." Sullivan's emphasis on the final words made his position clear. "You've created waves, Operative Daniels. Now it's time to see if you can navigate them at the highest levels." Inside the folder was a brief but alarming assessment. Intelligence had uncovered a pattern of catastrophic failures in coalition special operations across 3 continents. Initial analysis suggested a systematic compromise of tactical protocols. Someone was anticipating standard operational procedures and exploiting them with deadly precision. 27 operatives from 4 different countries had been lost in the past 8 months. Traditional security checks had revealed no leaks, no infiltration, no betrayal. "They think our playbook has been stolen," Olivia said, looking up from the documents. Sullivan nodded. "But it's worse than that. We believe someone has identified the underlying patterns in our operational planning, the fundamental approaches that inform all mission development. They're not countering specific tactics. They're exploiting the philosophical foundations of how we conceptualize operations. Olivia understood immediately. Military doctrine wasn't just a collection of techniques, it was a thought process, a way of approaching problems that became predictable once you understood its core assumptions. If someone had deciphered that framework, they could anticipate responses even to situations they hadn't specifically prepared for. You need someone who thinks outside established parameters, she said. Someone who can develop a completely new operational framework. Not just develop it, Sullivan corrected. Implement it across multiple agencies and international partners. Train personnel to execute it effectively. And do it all quietly enough that our adversaries don't realize we've changed the game. He paused. The Secretary is establishing a new division with extraordinary authority. We want you to lead it. The implications were enormous. This wasn't just another advisory position. This was operational command at a level that would affect military actions globally. The kind of authority normally reserved for career officers with decades of traditional advancement through the ranks. There will be resistance, Sullivan continued. Commanders who resent taking direction from someone with your unconventional background. Institutional forces that will fight any fundamental change to how we operate. Olivia thought of her teammates, of Gabriel's strategic brilliance, Sophia's technological innovation, Marcus's tactical precision, Elena's linguistic expertise, Michael's cultural insights, and James's uncanny ability to predict enemy movements. They had been selected for Phantom Shield precisely because they approached problems differently than traditional military thinkers. "When do I start?" she asked. Sullivan smiled for the first time. "You already have. Your security clearance has been upgraded. Your new office is being prepared at Pentagon Special Access Facility 3. You'll have authority to select your own team, anyone from any branch or agency." He handed her a second folder. "These are the personnel files of everyone who's been briefed on the situation. I'd suggest starting there." As Sullivan departed, Olivia returned her attention to the training exercise below. Team 2 had successfully completed their objective using the unconventional approach, demonstrating exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that would be needed for what lay ahead. She made a mental note of the team leader's name. That kind of creativity would be valuable in her new division. The challenges before her were daunting. Developing a new operational framework meant questioning fundamental assumptions that had guided military thinking for generations. Implementing it would require navigating bureaucracies designed to resist exactly this kind of change. Training personnel would mean overcoming ingrained habits and established procedures. But as she watched the trainees below adapting to unpredictable scenarios, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced since before Operation Phantom Shield: genuine hope. These men and women were learning to think beyond doctrine, to question assumptions, to find solutions where conventional wisdom saw only obstacles. They were becoming the kind of operatives who might have survived the mission that claimed her teammates. Over the next 3 weeks, Olivia reviewed hundreds of personnel files, conducted dozens of interviews, and observed numerous training exercises across different military branches. She wasn't looking for the candidates with the most impressive records or the highest test scores. She was searching for something rarer and more valuable: the ability to see beyond established patterns and adapt to the unexpected. Her selections raised eyebrows throughout the military establishment. Instead of choosing experienced officers with distinguished service records, she selected individuals who had demonstrated unconventional thinking, sometimes at the cost of their career advancement. Her team included Lieutenant Commander Eliza Montgomery, a naval intelligence officer who had been passed over for promotion twice because her risk assessments contradicted established doctrine. Her analysis had later been proven correct, but her willingness to challenge superior officers had stalled her career. Captain David Reyes, a Marine Corps tactical instructor whose training methods were considered unorthodox, but produced units with the highest survival rates in actual combat situations. His personnel file included multiple commendations for battlefield innovation alongside reprimands for deviation from approved protocols. Dr. Naomi Chen, a civilian behavioral scientist who specialized in predicting adaptive responses to changing conditions. Her research on how adversaries evolved their tactics had been largely ignored by military planners who preferred established threat models. Sergeant First Class Thomas Blackwell, an Army Special Forces operator whose unconventional approach to a hostage situation had saved 14 lives when the approved tactical response would have resulted in casualties. He had been removed from active field duty and assigned to equipment maintenance as a result of his, quote, failure to follow direct orders. Technical specialist Ryan O'Donnell, an Air Force communications expert, who had identified vulnerabilities in standard encryption protocols by thinking like an adversary rather than following security testing guidelines. His warnings had been dismissed until a major breach proved him right. When the team assembled for the first time in their secure facility, a windowless suite of rooms deep within the Pentagon complex, Olivia didn't waste time with traditional introductions or team-building exercises. Instead, she presented them with the operational failures that had prompted the formation of their division. "Our mission is straightforward but nearly impossible," she told them, standing before a digital display showing the locations of the 27 fallen operatives. "We need to develop an entirely new framework for special operations, one that our adversaries cannot predict because it doesn't follow the patterns they've identified in our current approach." She turned to face them directly. "Each of you is here because you've demonstrated the ability to think beyond established doctrine. You've seen solutions where others saw only approved procedures. In many cases, your careers have suffered because of it." She paused, making eye contact with each team member. "That ends today. In this division, your willingness to challenge assumptions isn't a liability, it's why you were selected." Over the following months, Olivia's team worked relentlessly to deconstruct traditional operational thinking and build something entirely new. They analyzed failed missions not just for tactical errors, but for the underlying assumptions that had made those errors inevitable. They studied successful adversarial operations to understand how enemy forces adapted to changing conditions. They developed simulation models that tested response patterns against unpredictable variables. The framework that emerged was revolutionary. A fluid approach to operational planning that incorporated continuous adaptation rather than predetermined response protocols. Instead of training operators to follow specific procedures for anticipated scenarios, they developed methodologies for real-time assessment and creative problem-solving under pressure. Implementation proved even more challenging than development. Military institutions resist change by their very nature, and Olivia's framework represented not just a new set of tactics but a fundamental shift in how operations were conceptualized. Commander after commander questioned her authority, challenged her expertise, and resisted implementing changes they viewed as untested and risky. But Olivia had anticipated this resistance. With Admiral Sullivan's support, she implemented a dual-track strategy. Publicly, she introduced incremental modifications to existing protocols. Changes significant enough to address the most critical vulnerabilities, but modest enough to avoid triggering institutional backlash. Privately, she worked with select units who were willing to adopt the complete framework, training them in the new methodologies away from traditional command oversight. The results soon spoke for themselves. The units operating under Olivia's complete framework began showing remarkable effectiveness in field operations. Missions that would have resulted in casualties under traditional protocols were completed successfully with minimal risk. Adversaries who had learned to anticipate standard responses found themselves confronting operators whose actions couldn't be predicted because they weren't following a predetermined playbook. Word spread through informal networks. Commanders who had initially resisted Olivia's methods began requesting her team's input on mission planning. Training officers sought guidance on implementing aspects of the new framework. The catastrophic failures that had prompted the division's formation ceased entirely. 6 months into the implementation, Olivia received an unexpected visitor. General Marcus Reynolds, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, arrived at her office unannounced, accompanied only by a single aide who remained outside. "Operative Daniels," he said, taking the seat she offered, "I've been reviewing the operational statistics since your division was established. Impressive doesn't begin to describe what you've accomplished." At 68, Reynolds represented the pinnacle of traditional military advancement: West Point graduate, distinguished combat service, methodical progression through the ranks. His support for Olivia's unconventional division had been lukewarm at best, influenced by concerns from field commanders about civilian interference in operational doctrine. "Thank you, sir," Olivia replied, waiting for the qualification she was certain would follow. Reynolds studied her with eyes that had witnessed conflicts across 5 decades. "I was wrong about your approach," he said finally. "I believed that military doctrine evolved through gradual refinement, not fundamental reimagining. Your results have convinced me otherwise." He placed a folder on her desk. The President has authorized the establishment of a permanent strategic innovation command under your direction. You'll have authority to implement your framework across all special operations units, with direct reporting to the Joint Chiefs. Olivia opened the folder and reviewed the authorization documents. The position represented unprecedented authority for someone with her background, a recognition that effective military leadership wasn't defined by traditional advancement through established channels, but by the ability to adapt to changing threats with innovative solutions. Your team's work has already saved lives, Reynolds continued, but more importantly, it's changing how we think about operational planning at the most fundamental level. He paused. There's something else you should know. Intelligence has confirmed that the operatives we lost were targeted based on predictive analysis of standard protocols. Your new framework has rendered that analysis useless. As Reynolds departed, Olivia remained at her desk, contemplating the implications of this development. The adversaries who had decoded traditional military thinking were now facing an approach they couldn't predict, a methodology that evolved constantly rather than following established patterns. The advantage they had exploited had been neutralized not through greater secrecy or improved security, but through creative reimagining of how operations were conceived and executed. That evening, alone in her office, Olivia opened the bottom drawer of her desk and removed a small wooden box she had carried with her since Operation Phantom Shield. Inside were 6 objects, personal items she had recovered from her teammates before leaving them behind. Gabriel's chess piece, a carved knight that he always carried for luck. Sophia's custom-coded flash drive, containing algorithms she had developed. Marcus's challenge coin, from his first command. Elena's linguistic reference card with dialect notations in her precise handwriting. Michael's small notebook, filled with cultural observations. James's compass with coordinates etched on the back. She arranged them on her desk, a private memorial to the team whose loss had set her on this path. "We're changing things," she said quietly to the empty room. "The lessons cost too much, but they're being heard now." The transformation Olivia had initiated was extending beyond special operations. Military training programs were beginning to incorporate elements of her adaptive framework. Leadership courses were emphasizing creative problem-solving alongside traditional command structures. The culture that had initially rejected her unconventional approach was gradually embracing the principles that made it effective. For Olivia herself, the greatest validation came not from institutional recognition, but from the operations that succeeded where others would have failed. Each successful mission represented lives saved, objectives achieved, and adversaries confounded by approaches they couldn't anticipate. The quiet observer, who had been dismissed as insignificant, had fundamentally changed how the military conceived its most critical operations. As she prepared for a briefing with international partners who had requested guidance on implementing her framework, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The humiliation on that training field had become the catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond her personal vindication. The prejudice she had faced had exposed weaknesses in military culture that, once addressed, strengthened the entire institution. The Phantom Shield emblem remained hidden beneath her uniform most days, a private reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. But its meaning had spread throughout military operations worldwide, carried forward by a new generation of leaders who understood that true strength often came disguised in unexpected packages, and that the most valuable capabilities might be found in those most easily overlooked. In military academies and training facilities, a new principle was being taught alongside traditional doctrine: never underestimate someone based on appearances. The lesson had been written in blood, but its implementation was saving lives every day. For Olivia Daniels, that was the only vindication that truly mattered. 2 years after the establishment of Strategic Innovation Command, Olivia found herself addressing the graduating class at West Point. Standing before rows of cadets in their formal uniforms, she represented something that hadn't existed when they began their military education: a new path to leadership based on innovative thinking rather than traditional advancement. "You've spent 4 years learning established doctrine," she told them, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "That foundation is essential. But your greatest value to this nation won't come from perfectly executing what you've been taught. It will come from recognizing when those teachings no longer apply to the challenges you face." She scanned the young faces before her, seeing in them the future of military leadership. Some would follow traditional paths, rising through the ranks by adhering to established protocols. Others would take the harder road, questioning assumptions and developing new approaches. Both were necessary. The strongest military isn't the one with the most rigid doctrine, she continued. It's the one that adapts fastest to changing conditions. Your instructors have given you tools. How you use them, when you set them aside for better ones, will determine whether you merely maintain the status quo or help forge something better. Among the graduates was Cadet Rebecca Martinez, who had written her senior thesis on Olivia's operational framework. Martinez had faced considerable pushback from traditional instructors who felt her focus on adaptive methodology undermined classical military theory. But she had persisted, developing applications of Olivia's principles that extended beyond special operations into conventional warfare. After the ceremony, Martinez approached Olivia with the confident bearing of someone who had found her path despite institutional resistance. "Your address was inspiring, ma'am," she said. "I've been accepted to advanced tactical school, but I've also received an offer to join the strategy development team at Fort Braxton." She hesitated. "The conventional path would be tactical school first, but I believe I could contribute more immediately to strategy development." Olivia studied the young officer, seeing in her the same determination that had carried her own innovations forward despite resistance. "Which path would challenge you to think beyond what you already know?" Martinez considered this carefully. "Strategy development would put me directly into creating new approaches rather than mastering existing ones." "Then you have your answer," Olivia replied. "Never choose the path that merely confirms what you already believe. Choose the one that forces you to question it." This philosophy, choosing growth over comfort, innovation over tradition, had become the hallmark of Olivia's approach to leadership development. The officers who trained under her direction weren't taught to follow her methods. They were taught to question them, to identify weaknesses, to develop improvements. Military effectiveness wasn't achieved through rigid adherence to doctrine, but through constant evolution and adaptation. The results were becoming evident across multiple operational theaters. Units trained in adaptive methodologies were demonstrating superior performance in complex environments where traditional approaches faltered. The framework Olivia had developed wasn't just saving lives. It was transforming how military operations were conceived and executed at the most fundamental level. But institutional resistance remained. Traditional military hierarchies were built on the premise that experience within established systems qualified one for leadership. Olivia's rapid advancement based on innovative capability rather than time served challenged that premise directly. Some senior officers viewed her as a threat to the system that had shaped their careers, a dangerous precedent that might undermine the traditional path to command. This resistance crystallized in the form of General Howard Blackwood, recently appointed Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Blackwood represented the epitome of traditional military advancement: 40 years of service, combat decorations from 3 conflicts, methodical progression through increasingly significant commands. He had built his reputation on strict adherence to established doctrine and expected others to follow the same path. Blackwood's opposition to Olivia's methods wasn't personal, it was philosophical. He genuinely believed that military effectiveness depended on disciplined execution of proven protocols, not continuous innovation and adaptation. In his view, Olivia's approach introduced dangerous unpredictability into systems designed to function with precise coordination. The confrontation came during a high-level review of special operations planning. Olivia had presented a new approach to high-risk extractions that departed significantly from established procedures. Instead of predetermined response protocols, she proposed a framework that allowed field commanders to assess conditions in real time and adapt their methods accordingly. "This undermines the entire concept of coordinated operations," Blackwood objected, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command experience. "If every unit is developing its own approach based on subjective assessment, how do we maintain operational cohesion?" The question was legitimate, one that Olivia had anticipated and addressed in her planning. But before she could respond, Blackwood continued. "Operative Daniels has achieved remarkable results in controlled environments," he acknowledged, nodding toward Olivia. "But introducing this level of operational flexibility across multiple theaters invites chaos. Military effectiveness depends on predictability, knowing exactly how each element will respond in coordinated operations." The room fell silent. Blackwood's critique went beyond questioning Olivia's specific proposal. It challenged the fundamental premise of her entire approach to military innovation. If he prevailed, the adaptive framework she had developed would be restricted to specialized applications rather than transforming broader operational doctrine. Olivia considered her response carefully. This wasn't just about defending her methodology. It was about addressing a legitimate concern that many traditional commanders shared. Dismissing Blackwood's perspective would only reinforce the perception that her approach disregarded established wisdom. "You're right about the critical importance of coordination, General," she began, acknowledging his concern directly. "But I believe we're approaching it from different directions. Traditional doctrine achieves coordination through standardized responses to anticipated scenarios. Our framework achieves it through shared principles of assessment and adaptation." She moved to the digital display and pulled up operational data from 3 recent missions. These operations involved 12 different units across 3 service branches. Each faced unique conditions that couldn't have been fully anticipated in planning. Under traditional doctrine, they would have followed standard protocols despite changing circumstances. The display showed the decision points where commanders had deviated from initial plans based on real-time assessment. Instead, they adapted their approaches based on shared analytical frameworks, while maintaining communication about their adjustments. The result wasn't chaos. It was more effective coordination because each element was responding to actual conditions rather than predetermined scenarios. Blackwood studied the data with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades evaluating operations. "The results are impressive," he acknowledged. "But this approach requires exceptional judgment at every level of command. Not every officer possesses that capability." "Which is precisely why we need to develop it," Olivia responded. "Our current training emphasizes procedural compliance over judgment development. We're creating officers who execute perfectly in anticipated scenarios but struggle when facing the unexpected." For several moments, Blackwood was silent, weighing decades of military tradition against the evidence before him. When he finally spoke, his tone had shifted from opposition to cautious consideration. "I've spent 40 years in a system that values consistency and predictability," he said. "Your approach challenges fundamental assumptions about how military operations should be structured." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I cannot argue with results. Perhaps there's a middle path, one that preserves the coordination benefits of established doctrine while incorporating the adaptive elements that have proven so effective." This single exchange represented a turning point in the integration of Olivia's methodology into broader military doctrine. Instead of rejecting traditional approaches entirely, she began working with experienced commanders like Blackwood to identify where adaptive elements could enhance rather than replace established procedures. The result wasn't a victory of one philosophy over another, but a synthesis that drew strength from both traditions. Over the following months, this collaborative approach yielded a new, integrated framework that preserved essential coordination mechanisms while incorporating adaptive methodology where it added the greatest value. Training programs were developed that taught both traditional protocols and adaptive techniques, emphasizing the judgment required to determine which approach best suited specific operational conditions. For Olivia, this evolution represented something more significant than the wholesale adoption of her methods. It demonstrated that true innovation didn't require demolishing existing structures, but could instead transform them from within, preserving valuable elements while discarding limitations. The military wasn't abandoning its traditions. It was adapting them to meet changing challenges. This principle extended beyond operational doctrine to the development of leadership itself. Traditional advancement through established channels remained a valid path, but it was no longer the only one. Officers who demonstrated exceptional innovative capacity could now advance based on their contributions rather than their time in service. The system was becoming more flexible, more responsive, more capable of recognizing and utilizing diverse forms of expertise. On the 5th anniversary of her appointment to lead Strategic Innovation Command, Olivia received an unusual request. The survivors of the 27 operatives who had been lost before her framework was implemented asked to meet with her privately. These were the families whose loved ones had fallen to the systematic exploitation of predictable protocols, the losses that had prompted the creation of her division. The meeting took place in a secure conference room at the Pentagon. 27 families, parents, spouses, siblings, children, gathered to meet the woman whose work had ensured that other families wouldn't face the same loss. Olivia had prepared remarks, But when she entered the room and saw their faces, she set her notes aside. "I never met your loved ones," she began, "but I know something about them that perhaps even you don't. They were exceptional, selected for the most challenging missions because they represented the best capabilities our military could field. The protocols they followed weren't flawed because they were poorly designed. They were flawed because they couldn't adapt to changing conditions." She moved closer to the families, making eye contact with each person as she continued. "What happened wasn't a failure of their skill or courage. It was a failure of our system to provide them with the flexibility they needed to respond to unexpected threats. That's what we've changed." A woman in the front row, the mother of a young lieutenant who had been among the first casualties, stood up. "My son believed in following orders exactly as they were given. He trusted the system that trained him." Are you saying that trust was misplaced? The question cut to the heart of military culture. The fundamental belief that discipline and adherence to established doctrine provided safety in chaotic situations. Olivia considered her response carefully, knowing that her answer mattered not just to these families but to the broader transformation she was leading. "His trust wasn't misplaced," she replied. "The system that trained him represented the best understanding we had at that time. But warfare evolves, and our adversaries study our methods just as we study theirs. What we've developed isn't a rejection of discipline, but an evolution of it. Discipline that includes the judgment to adapt when circumstances require it." Another family member spoke up, the brother of a senior operative who had been lost during the final mission before Olivia's framework was implemented. "My sister was always the one questioning procedures, asking why things were done a certain way. Her commanders considered it a character flaw." Olivia nodded, recognizing in this description the same qualities that had marked her own career. That kind of questioning isn't a flaw. It's an essential capability that we haven't valued enough. What we're building now is a system where asking why and suggesting alternatives isn't seen as undermining doctrine but as strengthening it. As the meeting continued, something unexpected emerged. These families, who had every reason to resent the military system that had failed their loved ones, began sharing stories of innovative thinking and adaptive responses that hadn't been recognized or developed. The lieutenant who had proposed alternative communication protocols that were rejected as unnecessary. The captain who had identified vulnerabilities in standard insertion methods but couldn't get anyone to listen. The sergeant who had developed unconventional equipment modifications that weren't authorized but might have saved lives. Each story represented not just a personal loss, but a systemic failure to recognize and utilize the innovative capacity that existed within traditional military structures. These fallen operatives hadn't just been victims of exploited protocols. They had been potential innovators whose contributions had been limited by institutional rigidity. As the meeting concluded, the mother who had asked the first question approached Olivia privately. "My son's commander told me he died following procedures exactly as he was trained to do," she said. "I took comfort in that for years, believing he did everything right and his death wasn't his fault." She paused, struggling with emotions that hadn't fully resolved despite the passage of time. "But now I wonder if doing everything right, according to flawed protocols, was actually wrong. If he had questioned those procedures, might he still be alive?" The question had no simple answer, no reassurance that could erase the complexity of military operations or the unpredictability of combat. But it deserved honesty. "We'll never know," Olivia admitted. "But what I can tell you is that his sacrifice has contributed to changes that are saving other lives." The question you're asking, the doubt you're expressing, is exactly what drives us to improve rather than simply accept established methods. Your son's legacy isn't just in how he died following protocols, it's in how his loss has helped transform those protocols for others. This conversation crystallized for Olivia the deeper purpose of the transformation she was leading. It wasn't just about developing more effective operational methods. It was about creating a military culture that valued and developed the innovative capacity of every service member, recognizing that the best ideas might come from unexpected sources, and that questioning established doctrine wasn't an act of defiance, but a contribution to collective improvement. In the years that followed, this principle became the foundation of a new approach to military leadership development. Academies and training programs began actively cultivating the capacity for critical assessment and creative problem-solving alongside traditional discipline and procedural expertise. Officers were evaluated not just on their ability to execute established protocols, but on their capability to identify when those protocols needed adaptation or replacement. The phantom shield emblem that Olivia carried hidden beneath her uniform had become something greater than a memorial to fallen comrades. It represented a transformation in military culture, a recognition that true strength came not from rigid adherence to established doctrine, but from the capacity to adapt and innovate when confronting the unexpected. The quiet observer, who had been dismissed as insignificant, had fundamentally changed how the military identified, developed, and deployed its most valuable resource, the creative human intelligence of its personnel. On the 10th anniversary of that pivotal morning at Fort McAllister, Olivia Daniels stood before the Joint Chiefs, presenting the results of this cultural transformation. The statistics were compelling. Operational effectiveness increased across all theaters. Casualty rates decreased even in high-risk environments. Retention of innovative personnel improved dramatically. But the most significant change couldn't be captured in numbers. It was evident in the questions being asked at every level of command, in the alternatives being proposed by junior officers who once would have remained silent, in the recognition that the strongest military wasn't the one with the most rigid doctrine, but the one that could adapt fastest to changing conditions. The woman who had been ordered to undress in front of her peers, who had been judged inadequate based on appearances, who had been dismissed as unqualified for the environment where she stood, had transformed that environment itself. Her legacy wasn't just in the operational framework she had developed, but in the military culture she had helped reshape, one that recognized that true capability often came in unexpected packages and that the strongest teams were those that valued diverse forms of expertise. The Special Forces tattoo that had shocked her critics that morning had become a symbol throughout military circles, not just of elite capability, but of the principle that true strength often remained hidden until the moment it was needed most. In military academies and training facilities across the nation, cadets learned the story of Olivia Daniels not as an anomaly, but as an exemplar of the leadership qualities the modern military sought to develop. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't won through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the recognition that human potential couldn't be judged by superficial characteristics, that the quiet observer might possess the insight that saved the mission, that the unconventional thinker might develop the approach that changed the game, that the person who didn't look the part might be the one who transformed how the part was played. For Olivia Daniels, that transformation was the only legacy that mattered. The assurance that the sacrifice of her teammates had led to something that would save lives long after their names had faded from memory. The Phantom Shield lived on, not just as a classified operation, but as a philosophy that recognized the hidden strength in every unexpected package, waiting for the right moment to emerge and change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our Inspirational Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. 15 years after that transformative morning at Fort McAllister, Olivia Daniels sat in the Oval Office across from the President of the United States. The path that had brought her here, from humiliated recruit to the highest levels of military strategic planning, represented more than personal vindication. It embodied a fundamental shift in how leadership potential was identified and developed throughout the armed forces. Your nomination has strong bipartisan support, the President said, sliding a folder across the polished desk. The Senate Armed Services Committee vote was unanimous, something I'm told hasn't happened for a Defense Department appointment in over 20 years. Olivia opened the folder to find the official nomination for Secretary of Defense, the first time in American history that someone who hadn't followed a traditional military career path had been selected for the position. The nomination represented more than personal achievement. It symbolized institutional recognition that effective leadership didn't always develop through conventional channels. This isn't just about your operational innovations, the President continued. It's about the cultural transformation you've led, the shift from valuing rank and time served to recognizing capability regardless of its source. She leaned forward, her expression serious. We're facing threats that don't respect our traditions or follow our rules of engagement. We need a defense strategy that's equally adaptable. Olivia considered the implications carefully. As Strategic Innovation Commander, she had influenced military operations significantly. As Secretary of Defense, she would shape national security policy at the highest level, determining not just how the military executed its mission, but how that mission was defined in a rapidly changing global environment. The traditional path to this position exists for good reasons, Olivia acknowledged. There's value in progression through established channels, experience that can't be gained any other way. The president nodded. Which is why your senior advisory team will include representatives from traditional command structures. We're not replacing conventional wisdom. We're supplementing it with perspectives that conventional advancement doesn't always develop. This balanced approach had become the hallmark of Olivia's leadership philosophy, recognizing the value in established systems while identifying where innovation could enhance rather than replace them. Military effectiveness wasn't achieved through rigid adherence to tradition or wholesale rejection of it, but through thoughtful integration of diverse approaches tailored to specific challenges. I accept the nomination, Olivia said finally, with the understanding that my role isn't to dismantle traditional structures, but to ensure they evolve to meet emerging threats. As she left the White House, Olivia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path hadn't been linear or predictable. It had been shaped by tragedy and opportunity, resistance and support, personal determination and collective transformation. The quiet observer, who had been dismissed as insignificant, now stood at the threshold of unprecedented influence. But before assuming her new role, Olivia had one important task to complete. The next morning, she boarded a military transport to a remote training facility in Montana, where a specialized unit was preparing for deployment. This wasn't an official visit. It wouldn't appear on any schedule or generate any press coverage. It was a personal mission to connect her past with the future she was helping to create. The facility was nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains, isolated from civilian observation. Here, the most elite operatives trained for missions that officially didn't exist, operations that required specialized skills beyond conventional military capabilities. The unit currently in residence represented the direct lineage of Operation Phantom Shield, a new generation of operatives selected for their adaptive capacity rather than their conformity to traditional profiles. Commander Sarah Winters met Olivia at the landing zone, a compact woman with intelligent eyes and the focused presence that marked elite operators. At 34, Winters had risen through the ranks based on exceptional performance rather than time served. Her unconventional approaches to complex challenges had initially stalled her career, until Olivia's reforms created new advancement pathways for innovative thinkers. "It's an honor to have you here, ma'am," Winters said as they walked toward the training compound. "The team is eager to meet you." "This isn't an inspection, Commander," Olivia assured her. "Consider it more of a pilgrimage." Winters nodded understanding. Everyone in Special Operations knew Olivia's history. Not just her rise to command, but the classified mission that had claimed her original team. The Phantom Shield operation had become part of the unofficial curriculum at advanced training facilities, a case study in how predictable protocols could be exploited by adaptive adversaries. The training area came into view as they crested a small rise, a complex of buildings designed to simulate various operational environments. Olivia could see teams moving through urban combat scenarios, practicing infiltration techniques, and conducting communications exercises. Their movements displayed the fluid adaptability that had become the hallmark of units trained under her reformed protocols. "They look ready," Olivia observed. Winters nodded. "Final evaluations tomorrow. Deployment next week if they pass. And the mission parameters. Similar to Operation Phantom Shield," Winters admitted, "but with adaptive protocols instead of fixed procedures. They'll have authority to modify their approach based on evolving conditions." This was the most significant change Olivia had implemented, shifting operational authority from distant command centers to the personnel actually facing mission conditions. Field teams now had the flexibility to adjust their methods in real time, rather than following predetermined protocols that might not match actual circumstances. "I'd like to speak with them before they deploy," Olivia said. "Not as their future secretary, just as someone who's walked the path they're following." Winters led her to a briefing room where 7 operators waited, 4 men and 3 women selected for their exceptional capabilities rather than their conformity to traditional military profiles. They rose as Olivia entered, their expressions revealing the mixture of respect and curiosity her presence inspired. "At ease," Olivia said, taking a seat at the table. "This isn't an official visit. I wanted to meet the team that's carrying forward the Phantom Shield legacy." For the next hour, she engaged with them not as a superior officer, but as a fellow operator, discussing tactical challenges, adaptive methodologies, and the psychological demands of missions where failure wasn't an option. These weren't theoretical conversations but practical exchanges between professionals who understood the reality behind the protocols. As the session concluded, a female lieutenant named Rodriguez asked the question that had been hovering unspoken. "Ma'am, the original Phantom Shield mission, would your team have survived with the protocols we're using now?" The question touched the core of everything Olivia had worked to transform, the rigid procedures that had failed to adapt when her teammates needed flexibility most. She considered her response carefully, aware that her answer mattered deeply to these operators preparing for similar challenges. "Yes," she said finally, "with the authority to adapt your approach based on actual conditions rather than predetermined scenarios, with training that develops judgment rather than just compliance, with leadership that values your assessment of the situation you're facing. Yes, I believe they would have survived." She paused, making eye contact with each team member. "But that's not just because the protocols are better. It's because you're being prepared differently. You're not just learning procedures. You're developing the judgment to know when those procedures need to change. That's the real transformation." After the meeting, Winters escorted Olivia to a memorial garden established at the edge of the facility, a quiet space where the names of fallen operators were commemorated. At the center stood a simple stone marker engraved with a Phantom Shield emblem and 7 stars, one for each member of the original team. "We bring each new class here before their final evaluation," Winters explained, "to remind them that protocols exist for a reason, but following them blindly can be just as dangerous as ignoring them completely. They need to understand that judgment matters as much as skill." Olivia stood before the memorial, remembering the faces of her teammates as they had been on that final night, confident, determined, trusting in a system that ultimately failed them. But their legacy had transformed that system in ways they could never have anticipated. "They would be proud of what you've built," Winters said quietly. "Not just the operational changes, but the cultural shift. The way we identify and develop talent now, the value we place on different perspectives. It's changing everything." As Olivia prepared to depart, Winters presented her with a small wooden box. Inside was a tactical compass with the Phantom Shield emblem etched on its cover. "From the team," Winters explained. "A reminder that you've helped us all find a new direction." The gesture touched Olivia deeply, not just the gift itself, but what it represented. The transformation she had initiated had become self-sustaining, carried forward by a new generation of leaders who understood the principles behind the protocols. The culture she had helped reshape was now reshaping itself, evolving to meet challenges she hadn't yet imagined. Back in Washington, the confirmation process proceeded with remarkable smoothness. Military leaders who might once have opposed a non-traditional nominee spoke of Olivia's proven effectiveness and innovative leadership. Former critics acknowledged that her methods had saved lives and improved operational outcomes. The Senate vote was 94-6, a margin that reflected broad recognition that national security challenges required new approaches alongside traditional expertise. The swearing-in ceremony was attended by representatives from every branch of the military, a visible demonstration of institutional support for leadership based on demonstrated capability rather than conventional advancement. As Olivia took the oath of office, she was acutely aware of how far both she and the military culture had evolved since that morning at Fort McAllister. Her first official act as secretary was establishing the Adaptive Leadership Initiative, a program designed to identify and develop innovative capacity throughout the defense establishment. Unlike traditional advancement pathways that emphasized seniority and conformity to established patterns, this initiative created opportunities for personnel who demonstrated exceptional problem-solving abilities regardless of their rank or background. Military effectiveness in the modern era depends on more than superior technology or established doctrine, Olivia explained at the program's launch. It requires leadership that can adapt to rapidly changing conditions, that can recognize when established approaches no longer address emerging challenges. The initiative included mentorship programs that paired innovative junior personnel with senior leaders who could help them navigate institutional structures. It created specialized advancement tracks for service members who demonstrated exceptional adaptive capacity. Most significantly, it established feedback mechanisms that brought insights from operational levels directly to strategic planning, ensuring that those facing challenges firsthand could influence how those challenges were addressed. But perhaps the most transformative element was the cultural shift it represented. The military had always valued discipline, hierarchy, and adherence to established procedures. Those remained essential elements of effective operations, but now they were balanced by equally strong emphasis on innovative thinking, adaptive response, and the recognition that effective solutions might come from unexpected sources. 6 months into her tenure, Olivia faced her first major crisis. Intelligence indicated that a non-state actor had acquired advanced technology capable of disrupting critical infrastructure across multiple nations. Traditional military responses were poorly suited to an adversary with no fixed location, no conventional forces, and no vulnerability to standard deterrence strategies. The Joint Chiefs proposed a conventional approach, identifying likely operational centers and developing strike packages to neutralize them. It was a methodology that had served well against traditional threats, built on decades of established doctrine. But Olivia recognized that it addressed the threat as military leaders wished it existed rather than as it actually did. Instead of immediately approving the proposed strategy, she convened a diverse planning team that included not just military experts, but specialists in asymmetric conflict, technology vulnerabilities, and psychological operations. Rather than focusing solely on kinetic responses, they developed a comprehensive approach that integrated cyber capabilities, information operations, and targeted interventions at critical vulnerability points. The resulting operation succeeded not through overwhelming force, but through precisely calibrated responses that exploited the adversary's organizational structure and operational assumptions. Instead of attacking what the enemy protected, the strategy targeted what they didn't realize needed protection. The threat was neutralized with minimal casualties and limited collateral impact. This approach, adaptive, integrated, focused on actual rather than assumed vulnerabilities, became the template for addressing complex security challenges under Olivia's leadership. Traditional military capabilities remained essential, but they were deployed as part of comprehensive strategies tailored to specific threats rather than applied according to predetermined doctrine. But beyond operational effectiveness, Olivia's most enduring legacy was the transformation in how leadership potential was identified and developed throughout the defense establishment. The pathways she created for innovative thinkers who didn't fit traditional profiles had begun producing a new generation of leaders who combined disciplined expertise with adaptive creativity. Lieutenant Rebecca Martinez, the West Point graduate who had written her thesis on Olivia's operational framework, now commanded a specialized unit that integrated conventional and asymmetric capabilities. Commander Sarah Winters had been appointed to lead the Joint Special Operations Training Center, where she was reshaping how elite operators prepared for evolving threats. Throughout the military, individuals who might once have been marginalized for questioning established doctrine were now advancing based on their capacity to improve it. On the anniversary of her confirmation as secretary, Olivia received an unexpected visitor. Captain Morgan Fairfield, the officer who had confronted her on the training field at Fort McAllister, requested a meeting. After her transfer to the Arctic Monitoring Station, Fairfield had disappeared from military advancement tracks. Her career had stalled at a level far below what her initial promise had suggested. Olivia agreed to the meeting, curious about what had brought Fairfield to her office after all these years. The woman who entered was physically recognizable as the confident, dismissive officer from that morning. But her bearing had changed fundamentally. The arrogance had been replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful presence. "Thank you for seeing me, Madam Secretary," Fairfield said, taking the offered seat. "I imagine you have more important matters on your agenda than reconnecting with someone from your past." "I find that understanding where we've been informs where we're going," Olivia replied. "What brings you to Washington, Captain?" Fairfield placed a folder on the desk between them. "I've spent 15 years at Arctic Monitoring Station Delta, not the career trajectory I envisioned when I graduated top of my class at West Point." There was no bitterness in her tone, just acknowledgement of reality. But it turned out to be exactly what I needed. She opened the folder to reveal detailed analysis of changing environmental conditions in the Arctic region and their implications for national security. Isolation gives you perspective. When you're monitoring ice flows for months on end, you start seeing patterns that aren't visible from comfortable command centers. What Fairfield had developed wasn't just environmental observation, but a comprehensive framework for understanding how climate changes were creating new security vulnerabilities, while simultaneously opening new strategic opportunities. It was innovative work that approached familiar challenges from entirely new perspectives. "This is impressive," Olivia acknowledged, reviewing the analysis. Have you shared it with Arctic Command? Fairfield nodded. They've implemented some of the monitoring protocols, but the broader strategic implications haven't gained traction. Traditional planning models don't have categories for the kinds of threats and opportunities I'm identifying. Olivia understood immediately. Fairfield had developed insights that didn't fit established doctrine. Exactly the kind of innovative thinking that traditional advancement structures often failed to recognize or utilize. The captain who had once mocked her for not fitting military expectations had herself become someone whose contributions didn't fit institutional categories. I'm establishing a climate security task force next month, Olivia said. Your perspective would be valuable. If you're interested in transferring from your current assignment, I can arrange it. Fairfield looked genuinely surprised. After our history, after what happened at Fort McAllister, you'd consider me for a position like that? The military isn't about personal grudges or past mistakes, Olivia replied. It's about utilizing every capability to address the challenges we face. You've developed expertise that we need. The question isn't what happened 15 years ago. It's what you can contribute now. As Fairfield departed with transfer paperwork in hand, Olivia reflected on how perfectly this encounter encapsulated the transformation she had worked to create. The officer who had once judged her based on appearances had developed valuable insights precisely because her own career hadn't followed a traditional path. The system that had once failed to recognize Olivia's capabilities had evolved to identify and utilize unexpected sources of expertise. This was the true measure of institutional change, not just that unconventional leaders like Olivia could rise to senior positions, but that the system itself had become more effective at identifying and developing diverse forms of capability. The military was stronger not because it had abandoned its traditions, but because it had expanded its conception of what constituted valuable contribution. In her private office later that evening, Olivia opened the bottom drawer of her desk and removed the wooden box containing mementos from her original team. After 15 years, she still maintained this personal connection to the people whose loss had set her on this path. But now these items represented not just tragic sacrifice, but the foundation of meaningful change, the beginning of a transformation that had made the military more effective, more adaptive, and more capable of recognizing capability in all its forms. The Phantom Shield emblem that had shocked her critics that morning at Fort McAllister had become something greater than a classified unit designation. It represented a philosophy that had reshaped military culture from within. The recognition that true strength often remained hidden until circumstances revealed it. That effective leadership required looking beyond superficial indicators to identify genuine capability. That the most valuable assets in any organization might be found in the people most easily overlooked. As Secretary of Defense, Olivia Daniels had the authority to reshape national security strategy at the highest levels. But her most significant achievement wasn't the operational innovations she had implemented or the strategic frameworks she had developed. It was the cultural transformation that enabled the military to recognize and utilize the full spectrum of human capability, to value diverse perspectives, to identify unconventional solutions, to develop leadership potential wherever it appeared. The woman who had been ordered to undress in front of her peers, who had been judged inadequate based on appearance, who had been dismissed as unqualified for the environment where she stood, had transformed that environment itself. Her legacy wasn't measured in personal advancement, but in institutional evolution, the creation of a military culture that recognized that true capability often came in unexpected packages, and that the strongest teams were those that valued diverse forms of expertise. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't won through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the recognition that human potential couldn't be judged by superficial characteristics, that the quiet observer might possess the insight that saved the mission, that the unconventional thinker might develop the approach that changed the game, that the person who didn't look the part might be the one who transformed how the part was played. For Olivia Daniels, that transformation was the only legacy that mattered. The assurance that the sacrifice of her teammates had led to something that would save lives and enhance security long after their names had faded from memory. The Phantom Shield lived on, not just as a classified operation, but as a philosophy that recognized the hidden strength in every unexpected package, waiting for the right moment to emerge and change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.